Friday, a podcast series devoted to the various fandoms brought to you by the Ocean County Library's annual all-ages Library Con, Fan Nation, The Geek Extravaganza. My name is Sarah, and I'm from Toms River, and joining me today is Hope and Kristen, both from Toms River as well. For today's episode, we'll be discussing all things fantasy. To start off, I just want to ask you guys, what fantasy title got you into the fantasy genre?
I guess I'll start. So I'm Hope. Probably the Chronicles of Narnia when I was a kid. I know it's what gets a lot of people into the fantasy genre. My older brother got a giant omnibus collection, and I was a little too young for it, but my mom would start reading it to me like a chapter a night. So I really got into it to the point where we didn't do it like every night. So by the time we got towards the end, I was a little too old to be read to, but I still wanted her to read it to me. So that was how I got into it, and it was fun, especially like the last book, where like to see my mom as she's reading it. I think she forgot some of the stuff, but like her expression towards the end, like everything's happening and shocking things, and her face was something I still remember. So that's probably what got me into it. What about you, Kristen?
For me, probably the first big fantasy title I remember reading was the first Harry Potter. We read it in English class in 4th or 5th grade, I forget which one, but it was what the class read together. So the teacher read it to us for about halfway through, and then she gave up because it was too hard for her to read some of the names, and she switched to the audiobook, and that is how the entire class learned to pronounce Hermione, which we were saying Hermione for months. But yeah, I think I really liked doing that with my class because we all discussed things together and had theories, what we thought was going to happen. And I'll never forget my teacher left the room during the reveal of who the bad guy was, and she came back in and was like, "What do you mean it's Quirrell?" I'm sorry if you haven't read that, that's a spoiler. But that was a memory I think I'll never actually forget, was her just being surprised about who the bad guy was.
Yeah. I think my first exposure to fantasy was probably very much like yours, Hope, where my parents were very much into the Lord of the Rings, and I think that I was probably too young to be listening to Lord of the Rings, but they decided to read it to me as a bedtime story anyway, because I think it's what they wanted to read. So, I remember struggling, I think, a bit to follow the plot, but I plodded along, and I got very much into it, and I think things just expanded outward from there.
You could have at least started with The Hobbit. That would have been a little bit more age appropriate.
Full on Lord of the Rings. Like dark.
They're like, we're going right into it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just Tom Bombadil. Get ready.
Tom Bombadil. Oh my gosh, I remember him.
He's my man.
Mm-hmm.
And people who've only seen the movies are missing out.
Yes, and I also remember, I think I did have the omnibus Narnia thing as well when I was growing up. It was the little white books or whatever, and they had like these little.
See, I just read Narnia during the pandemic. Like, that was one of my pandemic reads, but I listened to all the audiobooks of Narnia, and I went on very long walks around my neighborhood because there was nowhere to go.
Nice, yeah. Gosh, I don't remember what my pandemic read was. I read a lot.
I read the Witcher series, I read Dune, I read so many things.
Oh, wow. Well, speaking of, we were just mentioning all of these different series, so that really well leads into this, which was a lot of fantasy titles are parts of series. Literally everything I think we've mentioned so far are parts of series, and probably most of my favorites are parts of series. But does somebody have like a standalone fantasy that they want to share? If somebody's like, hey, I really don't want to dive into like a 3-book, 4-book whole thing, what's like just one book that's like, this is solid?
That's such a hard question because I do feel like everything I've ever read has somehow been like, well, now there's 6 more.
Exactly.
Even if it didn't start that way, they're like, we wrote 10 more books after.
So for me, I really also struggle with this question because so many things that I thought were going to be singular wound up being part of a duology.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, oh, you're killing me here. So ones that I could think of, I read The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, which is one of my favorites because it's just like a really heartwarming, cozy fantasy. I think it's like the definition of a cozy fantasy, and you'll just walk away feeling so warm and uplifted. And that definitely is a standalone. And another one that I think is a standalone, but they kind of hinted that it might be more. So like this is what you're talking about, where you think it's going to be one and then surprise, there's 6 more. But I just finished The Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi. And that was a really, really fantastic read that I loved that came out this year. And that's basically about a mother who used to be a wild pirate adventurer who gets dragged back in for... She's tried to settle down since then, but she gets dragged back in for one more trip. And she's very relatable as a woman that's, maybe not in like her young 20s as many fantasy women are. And she struggles with, missing her daughter and her knees hurt and she's too old for any of this nonsense. But it's still a fun adventure.
I must say I could not think of any standalone fantasy books that I've read. I feel like some books can be standalone, like sometimes, especially if it's a sequel that takes place years later. Like Dune, for instance, I just listened to the first one because I heard it gets strange later on, and I liked it so much. And I know some people call it a sci-fi, but it's a fantasy disguised as a sci-fi. But that one I really enjoyed because it ended on a high note, and other than the fact that he thinks he can have a wife and a mistress that I was not comfortable with. But, when you're an emperor.
It's all political.
Exactly.
Fine. 2 wives is a treat.
Well, you mentioned Brandon Sanderson. Have you read, I think his most recent one's a standalone, right? The Trust of the Emerald.
Oh, I did read that. Yeah. Yes, that one is good, yes. So thank you for reminding me. That is a good example.
Yeah, I haven't read it yet, but...
It's kind of based off of the Princess Bride, yes. What if instead of Buttercup staying at home and mourning the fact that Wesley got presumably killed by pirates, what if she went looking for him? And so it starts with Tress. Her boyfriend is kidnapped by an evil sorceress, and even though Tress has never left her island, she's gonna go looking for him. And there's pirates, and I love Brandon Sanderson because he has such a rich imagination. It wasn't an ocean. It was these weird, plant ocean where if these seeds got wet, it would, explode and, skewer the ship. So when, storms came, it was, a nightmare.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
I do recommend that. What about, did you answer this question?
Well, I was thinking it was hard because I feel like a lot of them are there's another book when you don't expect it to be. Made me think
is Caravel a standalone?
No, Caravel is there's 2 more. The Hollow Kingdom, which probably no one has heard of because I read it in middle school or high school. I think middle school. Was a book where a girl has to marry the troll king and just live underground with him. And I think there was a sequel later. But now talking about it, I'm this is just Beauty and the Beast again, which I greatly enjoy, so I get why I liked it. And I remember really liking that, but, I haven't read it in 20 years.
Yeah.
Or the Hazelwood I just read. And there's also another book where there's a second book, but there didn't really need to be. The first book ended and you could just be a girl and her mom, and they're always running away from their bad luck. And so her grandma wrote this book that was published for only a little bit, and it was all these fairy tales called Tale from the Hinterland. Mm-hmm. And people from the book start coming into real life, and it's fairy tales the way they kind of already are, so they're really dark, and people get murdered and stuff. And
I love things that come to life, from stories, in stories, that's my favorite
My
thing.
only thing was I feel there was a lot of her in New York before we got to fairy tale stuff starts happening.
Yeah.
I was this is a lot of hanging out in New York City before some weird stuff starts happening.
Let's get to the fun stuff. Come on. We know where we're going. Yeah.
I did like it, but there's a second one, so I'm I guess this is a series too. Oh, and that's Light Lark, which is going to be a series right now. It's standalone.
It's true. Right now, the second one hasn't come out yet.
No, so technically standalone. I read that because TikTok was it's the best and worst book ever. So I was oh, I can't wait. I thought it was fine.
It's good when people aren't When people are it was amazing, or people are it was terrible, then you're going to fall in one of those 2 camps, but you will have feelings.
I feel it's hard because everyone on TikTok has either read no books or read a million books, and I'm just I feel because we work here, I rate things much more forgivingly because I'm a 34-year-old woman, so I'm never like, wow, this is not an original YA book because I've read so many YA books. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, well, maybe a 14-year-old will find this super original.
Yeah.
So I try to be a little more forgiving on my rating system compared to...
I feel like I'm the opposite, honestly. I'm not rude with it, you know, like I don't like give 1s and 2s, but most books I read, I'm like, yeah, it's a 3. That's an average. That's average. 3, 4 stars, you know. Most things I read are average. It's very rarely that I'm like, this is a 5-star book.
Yeah, I think I rate them to like recommend them to like actual children in front of me. Mm-hmm. So I want to be like, yeah, this was good. You know, like it has to be really bad for me to be like, I'm not giving this to you. It's awful.
Yeah, I think that's different, recommending something, because at that point you're more thinking about their tastes and not so much yours. Like you said, you've read a huge amount of YA books at this point, so.
Yeah, like I'm never like, wow, shocker. Like, what a third act twist. It's almost like, yeah, okay, I've seen this before. But, you know.
But that's fine, because, I mean, I think we were talking about, you know, the retellings and how many different stories are retellings. Yeah.
So. Yeah, we'll have that later. But I did the same thing. Most books I started like a 3-star rating. And I'm like, this was a pleasant, you know, couple hours of my time. Mm-hmm. And then if I really connect to a character, then I'll be like, it was pretty good. Unless there was some things that made me upset, I'd probably just give it a 5.
I think for me to like dip down to like 1 or 2 territory, though, you have to really make a mess.
I try to allow myself to quit books now if I'm not into it.
Yes.
So that way there was this rule I heard that your age, 100 pages minus your age. So the older you are, the less pages you have to read.
I can't do that. I just suffer through. And there are some books that I would tell you from the beginning that I was like, this is awful. But like they kind of pull it together by the third act, so I'm like, okay, forgivable.
Yeah. I'm like you, I'm an unrepentant quitter. But I know people even more unrepentant quitters. I know somebody who will quit a book like 90% of the way through. They'll be like, no. And like, there's only 10% left. You might as well finish.
You have to finish, you know. And like I have the opposite. I have the 100-page rule. If you are 100 pages or less from the end of the book, it will take you only an hour to read that much book. No matter how much it took you to read the rest of it, that last 100 pages, you can knock that out in an hour.
That's true. That's true. But yeah, I don't even have 100 pages. I have 50 pages. If I'm not into it by 50 pages, then the author's not doing their job, or it's not for me, and I just stop reading it. We talked about some of our favorite fantasy series and different worlds. So now we can bring back in this series. Is there any fantasy world that you would love to visit? I think, well, you said Trust the Emerald Sea. I'm like, oh, that sounds really cool. But at the same time, I'm like, I don't want things to become spiky and explode at me. So.
Yeah, it's hard. Most of the fantasy worlds are like, you think about just living there as a person, you're like, no, that'd be awful. Like, unless you were the main character, you're not having, like, a good time. Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess maybe, like, everyone wants to be a hobbit.
Yeah.
That's probably like, the only place you feel like you can live safely. You eat a lot of food, you party a bunch, you just have a good time. Like,
in what era, though? Because,
after the villain was defeated.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
But then you can pretty much go anytime earlier. They are really just chilling almost the entirety of the history of Middle Earth. Like
a handful of blips, but mainly
they're having a good time.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I guess I could live in the Mistborn series after the first trilogy and the second trilogy, because they fixed the whole like world is ending, ash falling from the sky problem, and then you could potentially have cool like superpowers where you swallow metal and then you can like fly through the air.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
that does sound like a lot of fun.
Or I guess it's a children's fantasy series, but Keeper of the Lost Cities, where you live in the little magical elf realm. Yeah. That sounds fun. That seems safe.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know why, I thought, I wrote for this answer the Sunbearer Trials, which I did read and I did love, but it is the second one. The second one is coming out. And because it was such like a bright and colorful world, but I'm pretty sure the average person doesn't have magical powers. It's only those that are like demigods that actually have magical powers. So I'm like, maybe not, because like, what's the point? I want to have magical powers. Yeah, and they have like a whole Hunger Games thing going on. So yeah, probably not. It was really beautifully described, just like you were saying.
But yeah, unless you're important sometimes in these worlds, like you're not having a good time.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, you're the
That's like this, the Great Library series. The whole thing is, what if the Library of Alexandria didn't burn down and the library kind of controls the world?
Oh,
and you have like a futuristic Kindle that they can like, send books to you, but you can't have your own books.
Yes.
And there's a chance you'll get ripped apart by a giant monster that looks for books if you have an illegal one. So like, why would you want to be there?
It would be so dead.
I was like, no, I wouldn't have made it.
The smell of books. I don't want to live in a world without the smell of books.
You gotta go to like a Hunger Games Harry Potter school to be allowed to work in the library. That just seems awful.
I don't like my chances. I literally skipped cardio to sleep in this one.
Yeah. I don't want to do that much work to go work in a scary, evil library.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So most fantasy worlds, lovely to read, but maybe not so great to live in.
Except the Shire.
Yeah,
Except the Shire. So we've all agreed the Shire is where we'll go.
So what do you guys, I feel like a lot of fantasy books now are fantasy dystopia or fantasy more like horror compared to like high fantasy or like action adventure. Do you guys kind of think we're moving away from that as a genre? I feel like nothing's really like Lord of the Rings. Now it's like you're in a pretty dress, but also you have to overthrow the government alone. You know, it's like, why are we also overthrowing the government?
Yes.
In all of these books. Like,
Plus love triangle.
Plus love triangle, yeah. You have two boyfriends, the government is bad, you're in a nice dress, go. Like, it seems to be a lot of, I feel like...
It's a Shadow and Bone is what we were saying.
I feel like a lot of books you pick up that it looks fantasy and then they're like, also the government's corrupt, which might be just indicative of the time we live in.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I feel like, like Lord of the Rings, sure they want to kill the big bad guy, but everyone in the world hates him. It's not just the main characters. Everyone's like, he's bad. We gotta get him.
Yeah.
But in books now, I feel like it's 4 people are like, I think the government's corrupt. We should rise up.
Yeah, more complex. Absolutely.
Yeah, I do miss the nice little smaller state myth stories where it's like, the whole world isn't gonna end, but, your world will end if you don't take care of whatever this problem might be.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess that kind of shows why everything's a series. Like, nothing can be just done. I just need someone to go save, like, their brother or something and have that just be the story. Not be, well, now we gotta go get this thing to get this thing to get this thing.
Absolutely. I think I oscillate between liking like I said, I love T.J. Klune, and I love the cozy mystery. Like Legends of Latte is another one that's really simple, classic, cut and dry. But then I also love the Poppy Wars series, which is probably the most grimdark series known to mankind. So I kind of intersperse them. But I don't think that the original action adventure fantasy is dead. I just think that there are lots of other things in the mix, and that things might be shifting, but that doesn't mean that people still don't return to the traditional action adventure fantasy.
I feel like just dystopia just moved over and became dystopia fantasy. It was everything was dystopian for a while, and then they were like, let's just put dresses on everyone as well.
Yeah, the government's corrupt, but hey, you can buy pretty dresses.
Yeah.
And some sort of magic power. Yeah.
Yes.
And at least 2 boys.
That is true. Yeah, I've noticed too, I think TikTok has definitely helped a lot of romantasy, where it's the romance and the fantasy, Sarah J. Maas, where, it is giant, wars that are happening in big stakes, but...
I have trouble fitting in romance to my normal life. I don't know how these girls are running around being like, well, I gotta do 8 other things and talk to 2 boys.
Yes, that's why it's fantasy.
Yeah. They don't have to pay taxes, so they got so much more time.
Romantasy definitely has been on the rise. I don't think I'm a big romantasy reader, personally. One that I would recommend, though, to people, I guess I've read The Daughter of the Moon Goddess, which is a romantasy. But even then, I felt like she did do a lot of things outside of focusing on the main... I've read one that's a romantasy that's very clearly, just about the relationship, and the fantasy world is just the backdrop, and that was Bitter Medicine I read recently. That was basically a romance book with a couple of fantasy elements. I was like, this is just a romance. Daughter of the Moon Goddess, I think, is a good mix of a romance novel and fantasy.
I like in the Lunar Chronicles, everyone gets their boyfriend, but there's no this, you meet the man and you're like, this is the person they're gonna eventually date, but there's nobody else. It's just the two leads falling in love along with whatever else is happening. Yeah. Which I kind of like. I'm like, I don't need any other drama besides the drama of two people trying to figure out if they like each other. We don't need 8 other people involved in this relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
That stresses me out when I'm reading, and I'm like, clearly, Hunger Games. Clearly PETA, because, she's lived and risked her life with him. Gale was the nice boyfriend you had in high school, but then he went out into the world and he came back changed, and that's relationship's not going.
There was a minute of fear when I was whose name is she? I had to say. Because that can be
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that.
It's obviously it's PETA, but some people don't agree.
What were the other... Oh, we were still, okay, yeah, we were talking about the high fantasy and everything. And we already got into, I think, the next one, though. We were talking about the fantasy subgenres. Romantasy, I think, is a huge one. Like you said, the popularity has skyrocketed because of book talk. And urban fantasy, I think, is pretty standard. I don't think it's gone up or down. We get the same amount of J.R. Ward books. People who like J.R. Ward, they come in, they get their J.R. Ward. They know what they want.
I would argue, though, that that's paranormal romance, not urban fantasy. I like the urban fantasy where it's the Dresden Chronicles,
the Dresden Files are I would say, definitely urban fantasy.
Or Alana Andrews, where it's, there's romances, but it's mostly what if you were a private detective and fairies were real.
Yeah. Yes, that's true.
And the real world didn't know about it.
That's true. I think that's a more apt description of urban fantasy.
I feel with traditionally published urban fantasy, it hasn't changed a lot, but the independent published, some of which we have on Hoopla and stuff, I feel there's lots of new ones that are coming out. I guess one I'm reading is probably kind of a paranormal romance / urban fantasy. It's actually, I think it's the one you just mentioned, Bitter Medicine.
Yeah.
So that definitely feels like an urban fantasy with a heavy romance subplot.
Yeah. I said it's mainly just a romance. Yeah. But I really liked I was drawn into it actually because of the system. I thought it was cool. How the system actually worked in Magic. But you're right that it definitely has an urban fantasy feeling to it, though, the way that the world is constructed. And then Grimdark. And I'm definitely the person to talk to for Grimdark. I've read a whole bunch of Grimdark things. I don't know why. I really have to be in the mood to read it. But if you want to read something Grimdark, I absolutely would recommend The Poppy Wars by R.F. Kuang. Or her other book, Babel, which is a standalone. And that's also pretty grimdark. And then her most recent book wasn't a fantasy, actually. So she threw a screw in there.
Sometimes you just really want dark. That's right now I'm actually not reading a lot of fantasy. I'm reading a lot of murder books. I don't know. Sometimes you just want to go dark. You just go with, that's just the instinct.
Something gripping and telling. Yeah. Another one that it's pretty grimdark, I think, would be the Lock Tomb series, which is one of those ones that you said, Dune. It's technically a sci-fi, but there's necromancers. That's fantasy.
Yeah. Dune, half of the plot of Dune is set up by witches kind of started a religion, which I would argue is fantasy.
Exactly. So it's the same thing. So the Lock Tomb series, it's grimdark. There's necromancers. It's just they so happen to be in space. But who isn't? We are technically in space. Come on. So, I definitely would say that's another grimdark fantasy that I would recommend.
A display. It's in space, but so are we. So this book is fantasy. That's what it should say.
Sci-fi that is really fantasy. No, that's not a bad idea.
Yeah. For Grimdark, one author I like is Mark Lawrence. He kind of moved away from the Grimdark, but his first trilogy is what if this terrible, amoral, murderous 14-year-old had this redemption arc. It starts out he's killing people, he's running this band of murderers, and he wants the kingdom that's his birthright from his father who remarried, had a new kid, and was getting rid of the old kid. That was pretty cool, and I liked how he gradually matured, I guess. Because if you took a 14-year-old and threw them out of a palace and left them to survive on their own, they're probably gonna be pretty feral.
Feral.
Yeah.
That kind of sounds like, what if the kid from Ender's Game was like evil?
Yeah.
Instead of being.
Yeah, I mean, the author said he was like, what if you took the guy from the Clockwork Orange and gave him a tragic backstory and trauma and made him really young? Would the reader
sympathize instead of
be like, oh yeah, he just murdered those people, but it's okay.
But he's a child, so. Oh boy.
So that's if you want grimdark.
Thank you. Oh, that's a good recommendation.
Did you have any grimdarks that you liked?
I can't think of it. Like, I'm sure I have read some, but it's one of those, like, I read so many books. I think I've read 98 books this year so far, that sometimes they all start to bleed together. Or, like, if I read it, like, 2 years ago, I'll be like, yeah, I vaguely remember that.
I know, I do often have to, before these things, bring up my log and check.
Yeah, I was, like, trying to look through and be like, what else did I read?
Yeah. And if I haven't read in, like, the last year and a half, then unless it made a big impact on me, it's gone.
Next question. There are some very popular retellings of stories in the fantasy genre, such as Dorothy Must Die, The Lunar Chronicles, like 500 retellings of Beauty and the Beast. So, do we enjoy these, or do we prefer an original story?
If it is Beauty and the Beast, I will read it. That is... It's a trick to get me to read literally anything. If you tell me it is just like Beauty and the Beast, I will be like, all right.
So if I see any reviews coming in for Beauty and the Beast, I should get it for you.
Yeah. I'll be like, okay. I think that's the most perfect romantic story.
Was there a specific retelling that you liked?
I don't even know. I've read so many. Like, I feel like everything is always like, it's a retelling of Beauty and the Beast. I'm like, I'm here. I'll give it a try. But I feel like there are some times I'm like, okay, this is just this story again. Like, for some things that I'm like, I've already read this a bunch of times. If it's not Beauty and the Beast, that's how I feel about it sometimes. I'll be like, I've already read this. I don't need to read Sleeping Beauty again.
Mm-hmm.
So it has to be your preferred fairy tale.
Well, unless they're really doing something with it.
That's true.
Yeah. Well, Sleeping Beauty, I think it was called Gilded by Stephanie Meyer. No. That was a Rumpelstiltskin retelling. That's what it was. Yeah.
That one I have not read yet. I have it on my list, I think.
Actually, it was a duology. I was like, you can finish no one, but
this could have been one book.
Yeah, I read it and I enjoyed it. It was good. It was a good read. If you like the Lunar Chronicles, I think that you would like it. Definitely good. And yeah, that's generally how I feel about retellings. Generally good. Unless they do something very subversive with it. But it's not something that I'm going to scoff or turn my nose away at. I'll read a read. Most stories are retellings anyway. Of some form or another.
But sometimes they're like very obvious, like you literally just took this and put it in over here. Like you're like, what if they were in space? You know, like, you're like, okay, well you just changed where they are. You didn't really change the story. Like sometimes they need to do a little more.
But yeah, too much.
Yeah.
If she doesn't end up with the beast at the end, you're going to be upset.
I'll be upset. Yeah. Well, it's like, I like, it's funny because like the Lunar Chronicles are obviously retellings of popular stories, but they're also a retelling of Sailor Moon. If you've ever watched Sailor Moon, you'll be like, this is also Sailor Moon, which I kind of liked that she was just like, what if I took Cinderella and Sailor Moon and smushed it into one thing? That's another way to get me.
Yeah, no, I'm so happy you said that because I have watched Sailor Moon and I've read the Lunar Chronicles and I never put those two things together until you just said that. I'm like, you're right, it is Sailor Moon.
It's a bunch of girls, they're all friends, their girl friendship is the best. Mm-hmm. They have men, but they're like, they're okay,
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Tuxedo Mask is over here just chilling.
I listened to actually as an audio, the retelling of Aladdin, which is like my favorite Disney movie. Mm-hmm. It was The Forbidden Wish, and it was like, what if it's told from the perspective of the genie, who in this case is female, and, she wants to become a person, and not knowing the genie. And so you had Aladdin, but it was from her perspective. But I also like that Aladdin was still like recognizable. Sometimes when they do the retellings, if they have a different like point of view character, they might diminish, the others. They get all the screen time. But that was a good one. I enjoyed it, and it was recognizable as Aladdin, but different enough that I wasn't just like, I'm gonna stop reading this and just watch Aladdin.
Yeah. No, thank you. I wrote that down as a recommendation because Aladdin was also my favorite. Oh, another author that I thought of that does the retellings is Naomi Novik, with like Spinning Silver and what's her other one?
Oh, I read Spinning Silver.
Yeah, that's the Rumpelstiltskin retelling. I think I have a thing for Rumpelstiltskin retelling. I'm starting to realize that.
I think it was also in middle school. I remember somebody wrote, it was a bunch of authors. They all wrote a new version of Rumpelstiltskin, and it was like a book with like 6 or 7 different versions. And I was like, this is great. I remember thinking like, this is fantastic. This is the best way to do this, because it is kind of a short story. You know, it's a short story, so like,
there's definitely things you can expand.
But if you don't want to, you can just change enough to make it like original and still keep it like 50 pages, you know?
Yeah, I like when people also bring in things that are influenced by mythology. I think that's a lot of fun too. I haven't read it, but there's the one out right now, Stoneblind, I think, about it's like a Medusa retelling from her point of view. And I've heard great things about it. It has stellar reviews, so like, it's on my list.
You know what I thought of, made me think of was that Lore Olympus, which is like amazing, and it's just basically retellings of the stories, but they're in a city environment and a little more modern looking.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that as long as the author knows what they're doing with the material, I think it's absolutely fine to do a retelling.
I mean, also maybe now, like, I just feel like they just put it in the blurb because they're like, people know what this, you know, and they want people to read it. Yeah. They're just like, you know, it's Snow White. You know what Snow White is. Yeah. You'll know if you want to read this.
Yeah, exactly.
It's Snow White meets, you know, Sailor Moon.
Tron. Like, you know.
Or like...
Yeah, that sounds amazing, actually, how to describe that.
2 very different things, but go for it.
We'll figure that out. Yeah. On a computer.
There was, I think, that Misrule, I think, was like the Sapphic Sleeping Beauty one that came out recently. That was another one that was pretty popular. We are down with the retellings.
Yes. I guess I'll be the next question. With the popularity of the Game of Thrones, fantasy TV shows have exploded. What is our favorite or most recent favorite fantasy TV show?
This was another hard one because I feel like I watch a lot of not fantasy TV. You know, like I feel like I read a lot of fantasy or I'll watch a lot of fantasy movies, but I don't watch as much TV for that. Like the last one I remember is, what's it called? It's that one on Netflix, that Chinese one that everyone watched like over the pandemic. I will come back. I'm going to think of the title.
Oh, the one that was based off of the light novel?
Yeah.
I watched most of that. And I don't know why I stopped halfway through. Here's my horrible thing with TV shows is that I stopped halfway through, but not with the books, like not because I don't like them, just because like I would get busy with other things where I start getting into a new TV show and I'm like, I never finished that. Why did I never finish it?
Yeah.
I do that. Or if I'm binge watching, I get a little tired, and then I'm like, I need to take a break, and then like I never come back.
The Untamed.
Yes.
There we go. That's what it was called. You know what? It's funny because like I feel like there was so much of that show, and I was kind of like, but the last 6 episodes went nuts. So you really need to finish it. I was like, so much is happening after not that much was happening.
Yeah. If you like a ridiculous sea drama, I also recommend on Netflix is Love, Tree, Fairy, and Devil. It tells you exactly what it is right in the title. So
that sounds good, yeah.
Just like a retelling. But it's like fun and tropey and it's cute. One I wrote down was The Shadow and Bone. I watched the first season. The second season is out. I've watched a couple of episodes of the second season. I'm not finished with it yet, but I enjoyed it. I think they did a really good job with the casting. I think the crew was a lot of fun. And I watched the remake of His Dark Materials that I think was on Amazon Prime with Lin-Manuel Miranda.
I have it on my list because I recently got HBO Max, so I have not been able to watch it yet.
It's on HBO. I thought it was on Amazon. Did they move it?
I'm pretty sure it's a Max. I think it's an HBO show. You might be able to watch it through Amazon. Okay. You can watch everything through Amazon. That's just like a plug for Amazon.
Yeah. No, this is not what we're trying to do.
Do we have it in DVD?
We do. I'm pretty sure we have the DVD. That was
people who don't have Amazon.
Well, I rent it from the library.
Yeah, we definitely try our endeavor to get as many of these as we can available on DVD. Some streaming shows are not printed to DVD, but we try to get whatever we can. Yeah, so I enjoyed The Shadow and Bone, which is based off of the book. It's a mix between the Shadow and Bone series and the Six of Crows series, which was actually the one that I read. That's a fun one. And then His Dark Materials, that's based off the Golden Compass, and like series. which is fantastic. How about you, Hope?
So I also was watching Shadow and Bone and enjoying it. I read the trilogy, and I thought they did a pretty good job translating and like smushing the two storylines together. I think I'm probably at the same point you are. I'm only like 2 episodes into the second season. But you know, it's fun. I enjoyed it. Another one, it's like an older one now because it came out 10 years ago, but the Once Upon a Time series, I've been watching that with my mom, and she's not into watching TV, but she really enjoys it because it's a retelling, like we're talking about retellings, like what if all the fairy tale characters were in this little town in Maine and, you know, they had to keep fighting Rumpelstiltskin, who gets better, and then he has plots again, and the Evil Queen. So it's a good series. And we have the later seasons and some of like the book, there were like some tie-in books. So if people
That's another one I forgot I have in my queue. But I remember I forgot I watched The Witcher. I love The Witcher.
Oh
I forgot about The Witcher.
Same.
Because I only saw the first 2 episodes, and it was so confusing because they didn't make it clear that
It's different timelines at first.
Yeah.
I like it. It's nothing like the books, which I feel like in a way that people like don't like it because of that. But I'm just like, Because also I played The Witcher 3, which is like a kind of a spin-off of the books, and I really enjoyed that, so I'm just like, whatever. This show's its own thing. Like, we don't got time to feel like...
I like the show a lot. I haven't read the books, though, so I've
like
only played the game.
Looking at Henry Cavill with his long hair.
Long white hair,
just looking ripped, walking around with a big sword. Like, I don't know. It's a good time. I think he's more attractive as Geralt than he is as Superman. That's my hot take on this podcast.
Yeah, The Witcher is full of lots of beautiful people, yes.
But I was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I forgot The Witcher.
Yeah, and I read the books. The books are so confusing. I never needed a map. I'm a bad fantasy reader because I never look at the maps. I'm not interested in the maps. But I needed the map. And there was no map.
You could probably just use the map from like the video game to at least give you some idea of where things are.
I didn't think of that. I just thought of like fantasy Poland, you know, like kind of like World War II era with like evil fantasy.
Well, once they unlock their like, when people get their warp ability in that book, you're just like, where are you? Because they can just go from they're all over the place in the book once they can like.
I forgot that.
Like once you teleport, she kind of was just like, where is she? And then the portals, everyone just fast travels technically.
Location is irrelevant.
So yeah, you just walk through a portal and you're somewhere else, so it's fine.
Yeah, so the politics of the series I could not follow. But I was like, I like The Witcher, and he's a good example of he's not looking to throw over any kingdom. At least he was in the books.
No, that's my favorite. That's my favorite kind of joke in The Witcher. Every time he wanders into a room and everyone's just like, you must be for or against our plot. And he's like, I don't really care. And they're like, no, you must. And he's like, I just live here, whatever.
Yeah.
Like,
it's so relatable.
There's like, no, you have to have an opinion. And he's like, nah.
Yeah.
I'm like, Geralt, I respect you.
I do respect that too. I have not seen it, but I would be remiss to not mention another one that's been turned into a TV show, but it's still a very popular book series, which is the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan and finished by Brandon Sanderson. That is a TV series, but I'm not sure on what network, but it is also very popular. Did anyone
watch that Lord of the Rings show? I never got it.
I watched the first couple of episodes. I did. I didn't finish it though.
Okay. I kept being like,
I just wanted young Aragorn doing his ranger thing. That's all I wanted. And when it wasn't that, I was like, I'll get around to it eventually.
Yeah, it's the Galadriel story. So, like, based on, like, some of the events, I think, in the Silmarillion.
I feel like when you really like fantasy, it's almost harder to get into the show because if it's wrong, you're just like, no. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
I think what is important to me when something is adapted into a show, as long as I don't care about the plot points being exactly right, as long as they get the spirit of the characters right. What's important is that the characters act like the characters that I know, you know, and they don't do things that I feel like they wouldn't do that. I think that's why I liked The Shadow and Bone, because most of the time the characters are acting, even if they did things that weren't in the plot. I was like, man, I could see them doing that.
I read that book when it first came out, and I remember liking it, but I also remember nothing about it. So I kept thinking, I guess I should watch the show, but I have, like, no memory of the book at this point.
I read it back, when it came out, and then I thought, so I was rereading it, and I was like, this is a standard,
I feel like when
fantasy, and all of a sudden I was like, wait, what? This guy really is evil?
I feel like I read the second one, I was like, I don't remember what happened in the first one. Like, thank goodness sometimes there's websites that, like, recap the first book for me, because I'm like, I don't remember this at all. Especially if you put a big gap between your books. I could have read 100 books in between, and I'm like, what happened? Who knows?
I know. I think years ago, I read through like most of the Shannara series.
Ooh, I started that series.
I could not tell you what happens in it. I couldn't. I read, I think, like 20 of the books. Like, like I read so many of them, and I like literally cannot remember what happened.
Maybe that's what helps the retellings out. You're like, I know what happens in Beauty and the Beast, so you're like, I can follow some of this plot if we go off into like a
it's like one of those big like multi-generational tales though, so you kind of lose track of who's related to who across these thousands of years.
It's like Game of Thrones, and everyone had some people had kind of similar names, and I'm like, that makes sense within the world, but it's awful to do to your audience, because you're like, wait, which guy is this?
Have you ever seen that joke online when you're reading a fantasy book and you're like, and then he spoke to
like none of the names are, you don't remember any of them.
Yeah, like Sam.
That's why I love books with pronunciation guides.
Yes.
Or listen to the audiobook. There you go.
Yeah, the audiobook really helps. I feel like sometimes I'm like, I would have never said that character's name. But then again, sometimes they don't help. Because I did listen to a lot of The Witcher's audiobook. And if you've only seen the show, Jasker's name that's his name in Polish, but when they did the books in English, they changed it to Dandelion to try to like, because Jasker means buttercup in Polish, so they wanted to be like, well, but they didn't
similar feeling.
So for some reason, instead of just being, let's just keep it Jasker, and just being like, the audience will just accept and print this name, they changed it to Dandelion, which, I mean, it gets the same vibe. But the way the guy in the audiobook pronounces it, he puts the emphasis on the first syllable, so it's dandelion.
Oh.
And he pronounces it that way for, I swear, like 3 of the books. And I'm just like, just say dandelion, bro. Just do, cause like the video game went with dandelion, and they just say dandelion.
Yeah, and that's the whole reason why it was changed. It's not that it was like,
they were just like, we'll just change it to be like, Americans will understand that this is a stage name, but like the idea it's like a flower, but we'll go with more. It's just so weird that they were
just keep things as is. You can put a description in the back, put a footnote.
We would have understood the name.
Yeah, we should accept it. We're used to unpronounceable names.
Well, because also, like they're like Geralt's horse is named after a fish, like it's Roach, like it's named after like
a fish.
It's a fish.
Like, I thought it was like a bug.
No, it's a fish, but it's like I think a fish in Polish. Like they just left that the same, so I'm like, I don't understand why we couldn't just leave them anyway.
Well, if you're looking for a book with context and tons of footnotes, Fable by R. Huang does that, where like they constantly put footnotes explaining things.
I love a good footnote.
I'm the opposite.
And it can be, but I think it goes with the whole vibe of the story, though, because the whole story is about like Oxford and academia and everything, so it makes sense to have like a whole bunch of like footnotes explaining things, and the footnotes I think are a part of the story, the way that they are kind of in this different voice. I don't know, it's good.
Have either of you guys read any of the Thursday Next series by Jasper Ford? It's a series in an alternate present where the dodo is not extinct, and I think Neanderthals are around or something. Anyway, this girl Thursday Next figures out she can read herself into books. The first book's called The Eyre Affair because in her universe, Jane Eyre ends very differently, and she reads herself in and then like changes the ending to the canon ending of Jane Eyre. But as that goes on, she ends up meeting more people who like live in the books, who like preserve stories, and they speak to her through footnotes. So every so often she'll be like in the real world, and she'll be like, hey, and you have to go to the bottom, and they'll be like, Thursday, can you hear us? And like they're like talking to her.
Oh my gosh, stop, that's so funny. I love that.
Yeah, I was like, oh, this is fun.
I like a good stylistic change.
Yeah, that's an example of good footnotes. I read only the first book. It was a YA trilogy by Shelley Thomas. The Burning Sky, maybe, and it was all these footnotes that I just skipped over because I'm like, why do I need to read these footnotes? So I'm reading along, and there's a little footnote, and then I just flip to the back, and I'm like, I'm not doing that.
Those are endnotes.
Yeah.
footnotes should be in the footnotes.
Do you know it's the worst when you have an audiobook and you can tell there's footnotes and they don't read them? And I'm like, just read me the footnotes. I know it would make this book so much longer, but I can tell they're here. Like, you're skipping them. Just read me the footnotes.
Although, I was reading as an ebook, so maybe that's why they weren't.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes they do that.
And I don't feel like they added anything.
Yeah.
So I was like, why are these here?
Yeah.
It just annoyed me.
Footnotes should add something. Otherwise, they shouldn't be there. So, we were talking about TV shows and everything like that before, and this one question, how do you feel about remaking fantasy movies? Like, I know that they had, like, Aragorn, Narnia, and the like, into, like, a TV show. Because I think that back in the day, they were making everything into movies, and I think now, like, they're making everything into TV shows.
It's a toss-up, because in some ways it is better to make some of these stories have time to breathe instead of just being like, it's 2.5 hours and I will put in what we can. Mm-hmm. I mean, in some cases, like, Percy Jackson, I can't wait for that to be a TV show because the movies were awful.
Yeah. Aragon ones too.
Yes. Aragon was 90 minutes and I'm like, the book is 700 pages.
All I remember of that movie is there was the one cute guy at one point in leather pants. And as a younger girl, I remember being like, all right.
Gerald's husband.
Yes. But I don't remember any. And then one singer, Joss Stone, was in the movie at one point as like a psychic or something. And I was like, what is she doing here? But nothing else. Like,
yeah, I don't remember it at all. But I agree with you in the giving it time to breathe and everything. At the same point, I do wish that we would start moving away from some of the older IPs that have been like done to death. Even though I love them, even though, like, I love Lord of the Rings, but there are so many new, wonderful stories out there.
They talked about, like, making new, I think, Lord of the Rings movies, and I'm like, you can't remake perfection. Also, I get it if half the cast of Lord of the Rings had died in a plane crash, and they were like, oh, we miss all these people, let's make a new movie. But I don't know, it wasn't that long ago.
Mm-hmm. No,
20 years.
I mean, but still not that long. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, 20, but then the Hobbit movies came out and kept that going. I feel like it extended the life of Lord of the Rings. But they're just like, what are you going to do that you didn't already do in the first movie?
Yeah, that's why they should do young Aragon doing his ranger thing. Mm-hmm. I would watch that.
Yeah. But yeah, I would just love to see some, like, any of N.K. Jemison's works. Like, why don't you turn that into a film? I'm sure that'd be great. I think some of these that I listed, I think that I read Gilded Ones, which was a YA duology. I think that one's actually been signed by Netflix. A lot of things have been signed.
The worst is when you've heard that they're, like, in production and then you never hear. Like, I don't, like, I have the Forbidden Game series, which was by the woman who did Vampire Diaries.
Yes.
L.J. Smith. Mm-hmm. She has, like, a series where it's a girl and she meets a guy at a GameStop and he's like evil and he traps her in an evil board game and he loves her and she has a boyfriend and her friends get trapped. That's been like, maybe they'll make it a TV show or a movie for us for like 15 years. Yeah. And I'm just like, make it. Just do it. Like, where is it?
Yeah. I know, you hear they've been optioned and then they're like, just kidding. And you're like,
I read an adult fiction book that on the cover had a like soon to be a movie, like a show from Hulu, and I was like, was it? Like,
yeah. Usually by the time they put the sticker on it, that's finalized, but a lot of times they'll be like, they'll say that it's going to be coming to film because it's been like somebody licensed the rights to like make it into a film, but then they wind up dropping it, which can be very disappointing.
Yeah, I think it was the Children of Shadow and Bone. I think that was optioned or something. Like when it came out, they were like, and it's also going to be a movie, and then it's like nothing.
I think they kind of just option everything now right away in the off chance it becomes a like hit with the youth to make some money.
They're looking for the next
one. Well, like once the Hunger Games made $1 bajillion, I mean, I'm going to see that new movie. I liked that new book, but that's beside the point. Like, I'm like, I'm part of the problem. I'm giving them money. So
that's why they just remake, because it's a guarantee, they think. I mean, and we prove them right, because we're like, yes, we love the original Lord of the Rings, but then we still go and we still watch.
I have
like, see?
I know, you're right. I have a ticket to see the new Little Mermaid tonight, so I'm just really like proving to Disney that people like I will see it again. Yeah. But I don't think I'd watch a new Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I already own the extended editions, which are the preferred way to watch them.
Yes, exactly.
So no.
I confess, I did not watch the extended edition.
You know what? If there's a snow day here, I'm at home probably watching all of the Lord of the Rings in a row.
And how would you know to pause it and explain what happens to Aragorn's toe?
Yeah. Listen, he broke his toe in this scene again. Well, and also my DVDs are so old. They're 2 discs. Like, I have to take the disc out and put in the second disc to continue the movie.
Oh no, that's the same thing.
And I was like, I got the big pack that has the 6 hours, like the behind the scenes twice as long as the movie, and I will also watch that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we should watch it together sometime. It's the same thing. I know. But yes, we love all of these old IPs, but I think there are so many new ones that they can expand on. I don't have anything against the TV show format because,
like, if they made a movie of House of the Cerulean Sea, I'd watch that so fast.
See, actually, I really loved it as a literary form. There are some things that I'm like, I don't know if that really needs to. So there are some things that I think would be a great movie and some things that I don't.
You know what else I liked about that one? I feel like it was, I don't know if any of you guys ever listened to Welcome to Night Vale.
Yes.
I feel like if you were like, I really want to get into Night Vale, it's long, but I really want that, like, LGBT, relationship, just read Cerulean Sea. Mm-hmm. It's like a shorter.
Yeah. And it has similar vibes.
Similar vibes, and you don't have 500 hours to listen to a podcast. I'd be like, read this book instead. You can, like, kind of scratch that itch.
Night Vale has a bit more horror in it, I think, than existential horror and everything like that. That's really insane, which has none of that and just a lot of comfy cozy.
Yeah, but I mean, I just feel like if you wanted the relationship of Night Vale, but you didn't want to get into all the, like, other stuff, you're like, just go read Cerulean Sea. That will just cover your...
Yeah. The Grumpy Run and the Sunshine one. Dynamic.
Yeah. Everyone loves that.
But yeah, there's some things that I've read, I'm like, this would do, like, I mentioned the Gilded Ones because they read almost like, I was like, no, this would do really good as a TV show. Like, I can see these, a lot of action scenes, a lot of, like, moving around places and things like that. Versus when you're reading something and then, like, it has more internal things, more, like, slow moments. So you're like, maybe this wouldn't be so good as a visual medium.
Like the original Dune movie where they gave everyone's voiceovers, they gave them actually voiceovers.
Yeah.
Yes.
And everyone whispers.
It wasn't bad, but
it's not bad, but it is a very strange. David Lynch he's on another planet. I love him so much. What a good decision.
But I watched that movie during pandemic, and I was like, yes, it hit all the main points. But I'm like, I don't know, the book was better.
Well, that's like the new Dune movie. It ended, and my friend hadn't read Dune, and I was like, so that was the first half of Dune.
Yeah.
And she was like, okay. I'm like, that's pretty much what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, they had more room.
That actually reminds me, there's something that was very popular that was turned into a TV show that I didn't watch it. There was a children's series, The School of Good and Evil.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I read all those, but I did not watch that movie yet.
Yeah, it was trending for a while, I think.
I don't know if it's an interesting series. I do give it to a lot of children. Yeah. So, like, be like, go read this. You'll like this. It is an extremely large book, so I was wondering, I have to watch it to see how much they actually got into the movie, because that's another book that's 500 pages for children.
Yeah. But like the Keeper in the Lost City, like, kids will, the book they like, they will read that books.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, sometimes I feel that they'll come in and I'm like, you can't carry all of these. They're like, watch me. They want to check out, like, okay, I need 3, 4, 5, and 6. I'm like, how about you get it back?
What's mildly annoying about that series is the audiobooks are Audible only. Oh. And I'm just like, because I'm like, maybe I'll listen to it, and I always forget, and I'm like, no, I'm going to use Libby or Hoopla. I'm not using our life.
Unfortunately, yes, the titles are Audible locked. But once they become on Audible locked, we'll definitely be adding them to Libby or Hoopla if we can. You can read the ebooks, though, on Libby.
Yes.
If you are on the go, they are there. And Percy Jackson, all the audiobooks are on Libby and Hoopla as well. And
you got time to read them before the show comes out.
Yes. So please. And the new one, The Sun and the Star.
Yeah, I have that at my house. Have not started it yet.
I haven't read it yet either, but it's supposed to be great, so I'm going to free recommend it.
I am very excited for that one.
Yes. Thank you for listening. Be sure to visit our website, theoceancountylibrary.org/teen/fannation, for a listing of all events happening this year. All titles mentioned in today's episode can be accessed free with your library card, whether that's physically or through our digital platforms. Until next time, have a fantastic day.